Welcome to the Warp. In this video, I'm going to be talking about more aliens that can be used as any player. And these are going to be the yellow alert ones. As any player means that even if you're a main player or an ally or not involved in the encounter, you're going to have an opportunity to use your alien power pretty much every encounter. That means that these are really good aliens to have in large group games where you have 6, 7, or 8 players, because if you have an alien that you can only use as a main player, you're less likely to use that power in a game with so many players. But as any player, you have the potential to do it every encounter. Now, there are more yellow alert aliens than there are aliens of the green or the red alert. So there are more aliens for me to choose from, but I've managed to narrow it down to the top 10 asterisk, you'll see what I mean in a minute, as any player from the yellow alert category. So let's dive in. I'll talk about what the aliens are, what they do, and why I like them. Our first one is Fido, and this is from the base game. So Fido is an optional alien. It's the power to fetch. So after encounter cards are discarded at the end of an encounter, you may use this power to retrieve one of the discarded cards and offer it to another player. If the card is refused, you may keep it. If the card is accepted, the other player keeps the card, and then you may retrieve one ship from the warp or draw one card from the deck. Very similar to rewards, although not technically rewards, because it has no mention of the reward deck itself, so you wouldn't be able to draw from that. But still pretty good, and this is a very underestimated alien. Fido, you're going to be able to use this every encounter if you wish. And there are a lot of reasons why you might want to take one of those cards, even if neither one of them is particularly good. There are reasons why Fido would want to keep that card, so you can offer an attack 0 to somebody and they probably won't want it. And the reasons you might want to keep it is, one, you could have some non-encounter cards in your hand that you don't want to have to discard because you're drawing a new hand. So the more encounter cards you have, the less likely that is to happen. So you might have an artifact or a reinforcement or a good flare that you want to be able to decide when you want to play it rather than having to play it because you're afraid you're going to lose it. And the other reason you might want to have those extra cards in your hand is buffer and get against compensation. So if somebody's taking cards from you, if you've got 15 cards in your hand, they're less likely to get to your really good cards on there. The downside, of course, is if you don't have very many encounter cards and they're all not particularly good, you are going to have to play them eventually. But in a large group, your turns are going to come up less frequently and you're going to be attacked less frequently. So it's not as big a deal. You can offer those cards to other players and they might accept them for the same reasons that I just explained why you might want them yourself. But there are going to be occasions where you might give a good card to a player who's very behind in the colony count so that you can get a reward of a ship out or a card from the deck. And sometimes cards that are not cards that you want or that most players want are cards that specific aliens do want. Like Antimatter wants low attack cards. Pacifist does want negotiate cards and things like that. So you've got some flexibility depending on the mix of aliens. But again, it's always good to fill up your hand with cards anyway, just to have a lot of cards. So Fido, a particularly good alien that you'll be able to use throughout the game. Our next alien is Gremlin. This is from Cosmic Odyssey. So this alien has the power to meddle. At the start of each player's turn, draw a hazard card from the hazard deck, even if that hazard deck variant is not being used. So you can always use the Gremlin and place it face down on this sheet. At the end of the Destiny phase, if no hazard warnings were drawn during this encounter, you may use this power to play a hazard card from this sheet. Before the hazard deck discard pile is shuffled to form the deck, discard all hazard cards on this sheet. So Gremlin gets to use hazards, whether they're part of the game normally or not. And it gives you some flexibility to alter certain encounters depending on whose turn it is, what the effects are, and what you want to have happen. Some of these hazard effects will make the game more difficult for whoever is the offense. Some of them might make it easier. You could also use them as leverage. You could say, look, Green, it's your turn. I expect to get an alliance invitation here. Otherwise, I've got a hazard on my sheet that you are definitely not going to want me to play. And you can usually get people to bend to your will with that. So I like Gremlin. It's fun to get those different hazard effects in there. They're basically like event cards that can have different kinds of effects on the game. And if you've got the hazard deck from Cosmic Odyssey, which if you've got the Gremlin, then you probably have that, they have a couple of new things in the hazard deck, particularly the alt hazards, which give the offense an alternative to having an encounter at all. They can usually get something for not attacking another player. So it's an interesting twist on the game, and I enjoy seeing Gremlin in the game, whether I'm playing it or not. Our next alien is from Cosmic Dominion. It is the Host. So the way this alien works is you're going to have extra flares at your disposal. So at the start of any player's turn, you may remove any or all flares on the sheet from the game, and then or draw cards from the flare deck to place face down on the sheet until you have 3 here in either order. And this was phrased so that this didn't have to be game setup text. We wanted Host to be able to be an alien that could be added to a game in progress, because there are a number of effects now that add aliens or switch out the alien that you were and give you a different alien. So you're going to have these flares, extra flares that weren't part of the game normally, on your sheet. At any time, you may use this power to play a wild flare from the sheet as though it were in your hand. If the flare would return to your hand after use, you discard it to the regular discard pile. And if you're zapped, place the flare back on the sheet. Cards played from the sheet do not count toward the normal limit of 1 flare per encounter. So Host is going to add a lot of interesting flare effects to the game. You're always going to have 3 to choose from, a little bit like Essence cards that way. And some of these effects will definitely help you out in a certain situation, or again, they can be used to help other players and to get incentivized to be invited as an ally or to attack certain colonies, what have you. So I like that flexibility. The flares, there's so many interesting effects, and most flares are not going to be in the game. So it's nice to have those extra effects in there, and you can usually make use of at least one of those 3 flares. Plus, you can always discard some at the start of another player's turn. If you've got a couple of like, I don't think I'm ever going to need to use this, you have a way to get rid of that. Our next alien is from the base game. It is the Mind. And the way the Mind works is the power of knowledge. Before allies are invited in an encounter, you may use this power to look at the entire hand of one of the main players. And that's all there really is to it. It says you may not tell other players what cards you see in a player's hand using this power. It's a little bit weird, and sometimes it's hard to remember that you're not supposed to do that. But the important part about Mind is the card knowledge. You'll know what a certain player's highest attack card is, or if they've got reinforcements, or if they've got a special flare artifact that they can play. And you can make informed decisions because you're doing this before you're deciding which side you want to ally with. And of course, you can use it as any player. So when you're a main player, you can know what your opponent has in their hand, and you can make appropriate decisions about what encounter card to play. It really helps with your hand management. So Mind is a great alien. In a large player count, it's going to be an alien that you don't mind having to try to keep track of a lot of players and what's going on. And usually I just boil down to, all right, I saw Yellow's hand. I know that they have the 40. What else they have in their hand certainly might be important, but that 40 is probably the most important thing to know. So you know, all right, don't ally against them or join their side if they're in an encounter, depending on who they're up against. You can usually boil it down to the essentials with that alien if you're not good at spinning keeping all the plates spinning. Our next alien from Cosmic Odyssey is Lloyd. This is a really powerful alien. You can use as any player, of course, and it's optional. Power to insure. At any time, you may use this power to offer to insure any or all of the following assets of another player until the end of the encounter. So their power before it's used, ships before they're lost or captured, and specifically named cards before they are played, discarded, or taken. Insured cards must be named explicitly, for example, the Attack 30 or a Cosmic Zap or the Lloyd Flare. If your offer is accepted, you're going to place a Cosmic token on your sheet. And insured alien powers cannot be lost or canceled. Insured ships are returned to colonies instead of being lost or captured. And insured cards cannot be forcibly discarded, taken, or collected as compensations. So, an insured card can only be played once per encounter, At any time, you may spend tokens on this sheet to gain rewards. So, Lloyd, now it's one of those aliens that certainly everybody could ignore, but in my experience, almost nobody is able to ignore Lloyd. They are ready to ensure their good cards or make sure that their power doesn't get zapped. Or they want to risk 4 ships, but they don't want to lose them. And they're like, you can have a token for that. And that's it. If the players had to actually pay for the insurance, well, then Lloyd would be much more easily ignored. But they figure it doesn't cost me anything. I only can not lose, so why not take advantage of it? And you can accumulate those tokens until you really like, ooh, I need to get a lot of ships out of the warp, or I'm going to get a lot of reward cards and really arm myself to hopefully win the game. So Lloyd can use it every encounter and is super powerful. Our next alien is from Cosmic Storm, and it is Patriot. So Patriot works like this: Power of Loyalty, another optional alien. Once per encounter, you may use this power to show any player one card from your hand as a show of loyalty, whatever that means. Anyway, if the player accepts your loyalty, they're going to add the card to their hand. If the player declines your loyalty, they must give you one of their ships from any colony. You place that ship on this sheet. Now, as a main player, after alliances are formed, you may use this power to return all ships on the sheet belonging to the opposing main player. Proceed to the resolution phase and resolve the encounter as if both players had revealed negotiate cards. So what you're going to be doing throughout the game is you're going to be doing this whole loyalty business with various other players. And you can do that to get rid of cards that you don't want in your hand, or to give cards that players might find useful. And again, I like to leverage this as a way to get alliances or to get players to do what I want them to do. And depending on how the game is going, players are not necessarily interested in having their ships captured. But inevitably it is going to happen, and at some point you're going to be opposing a player who has those ships, and you have the opportunity to put yourself into a deal situation without having to go through the rigmarole of having the encounter. And that can be very useful, especially when you're Patriot and you are the defensive main player. Because again, the defense doesn't normally get anything for winning an encounter, but if you can get into a deal situation, you can usually leverage your way into a colony exchange or get something else for it. So Patriot, pretty handy to have. Our next alien from Cosmic Dominion is Quartermaster. Now this is a really good alien to have in a large group, especially if you have a reward deck in play. So it's power to supply. This is a mandatory alien. So here's how it works. Whenever other players should receive rewards, you're going to use this power. Those players announce how many rewards of each kind they will receive. Now you are going to decide which colonies their ships return to, if they're getting ships out of the warp. And then you're going to draw all of the cards together. So let's say that there are 3 players who are gaining rewards as defensive allies in a winning encounter, and they've declared however many cards they're going to get from either the deck or the reward deck. And you're going to draw those cards, and you're going to get to look at them, and then you will deliver the appropriate number to each player as you choose. That means you're deciding who's getting what rewards. So you can go, oh, here's a good kicker. Well, I got to make sure I give this to this player rather than that player. If multiple sources are involved, for instance, the Cosmic and Reward decks, you must draw the cards as announced, but may deliver them as you choose. So player green may have said, I want 4 cards from the Reward deck, and player yellow says, I want 2 cards from the Cosmic deck. You can end up giving green those 2 Cosmic deck cards instead of Reward deck. As long as players receive the number of cards that they were due. If you are due rewards as well, receive yours afterwards. Otherwise, when delivering the other's rewards, you may retrieve one of your ships from the warp or draw 1 extra card from a deck those rewards came from. Include that card in your delivery decisions and keep whichever card is left over for yourself. So if you're not getting rewards as Quartermaster, you're going to draw an extra card or get an extra ship out of the warp, being your ship, and you will get you'll get basically the best card. That's what's great about this alien is if you sit it out, you're still going to get something, and you'll get the best of all of those. And it really has an interesting change in the dynamic of rewards. More players start to get ships rather than cards because they're afraid of giving you something that's too good. So I enjoy Quartermaster. I love to play Quartermaster, especially in a large group game, because players are it's hard for them to resist the reward deck, first of all, and there's going to be more rewards moving around, and Quartermaster is going to get a chance to do his thing fairly regularly. All right, from the base game is Remora, and Remora is a pretty handy alien. It's optional. Whenever another player retrieves one or more ships from the warp, you may use this power to retrieve one of your ships from the warp as well. You may not retrieve a ship from the warp during the same encounter in which it went to the warp. When another player draws one or more cards from the deck, you may use this power to draw one card from the deck as well. So, anytime somebody's getting ships out of the warp, which will be a lot of the times, if you have ships in the warp as Remora, you're going to be getting them out as well, which means that you can risk more ships throughout the game as the offense and as an ally. You can send more ships in because there's always going to be some mechanism for people getting their ships out, and that means you're going to be getting ships out at a much more frequent rate than anybody else in the game. Plus with the drawing of the cards. Now, it's important to note that this only works on the deck. You're only getting those cards when people draw from the Cosmic deck, not from the Reward deck. So Reward deck is going to temper the effectiveness of Remora, but it is still a very useful alien. You are going to have opportunities to draw from the deck, and the ship resources are going to be even more frequent. So I still like Remora. I'm still happy to play it if given the option, because I know that I'm going to have more cards than a normal player, and I'm going to have ships out of the warp more often than the others. Also from the base game is Shadow. So Shadow is an alien that's going to fire pretty much every encounter. So whenever any other player's color or a special Destiny card that targets another player is drawn from the Destiny deck, use his power to choose one of that player's ships from any colony of your choice and send it to the warp. And on a wild Destiny card, you may execute one ship belonging to any other player, regardless of who it is that the offense chooses to attack. So the only time that Shadow doesn't do his thing is when his own color comes up. That means that you are going to be able to use your power almost every encounter, and you're going to be zapping ships and looking for colonies where there's only a couple of ships on there, making them weaker. And it's not always easy for players to move their ships around between their colonies to keep them bolstered. So before long, you will be zapping colonies. And that's what makes Shadow so scary to have in the game, is it's relentless. They're going to be continually reducing your ships and filling up the warp with your ships. So Shadow, very good alien to play. It keeps you involved even in large player counts. And that brings us to our last of our top 10, and it's actually a three-way tie, and that's the asterisk here. These are all Essence aliens, and they're all from Cosmic Eons, and they're very different in how they work, but they do have that common denominator of being Essence aliens. And Essence aliens, they're going to have their own mini decks of cards, and they'll have their own cache of 3 of them pretty much at all times. And there are certain situations when they'll get to fire. So I'm going to cover each one of these and talk about them. I kind of like them all fairly equally. Probably my favorite out of them is Sheriff, which I'll talk about last. So our first one is Assistant. And Assistant works like this. It's mandatory. You have the power to be helpful as a main player or ally after alliances are formed, but before another player, before encounter cards are selected. Use his power if there are any other players on your side of the encounter. Give 1 help card from your Essence card cache to one of those players and then gain 1 reward. A player who has been given a help card can keep it face down or face up and look at it. Other players may give their help cards back to you once, per the timing on that card. And when they do, you use this power to provide the help as instructed, and then either gain 1 reward, or if you can immediately use the help card for yourself, you may do so before placing the card face down in the unavailable pile. So you're going to be gaining a reward when you give a help card to somebody, and you'll be potentially gaining a reward when they use the help card. Here are some examples for Assistant. So this is Ship Scarcity. At any time, the Assistant will retrieve any or all of your ships from the warp per your instructions. Needed card. At any time, the Assistant will find a card you name in the discard pile and give it to you. Lost Territory. At any time, if you have lost a home colony, the Assistant will recolonize one of your home planets using up to 3 of your ships from your other colonies and or the warp per your instructions. So, again, these are hard to resist. You know, you can look at who's lost a home colony and go, maybe I'll give you this Lost Territory card. And it gives you a chance to really pick your poison as it is and find the right player to receive the appropriate help. And the help cards do a number of different things, like give them a good card, get ships out of the warp. It's stuff that is generally pretty handy. Because you have a choice of 3 that you can give out, you can usually give a help card to somebody that's going to want to take advantage of what that card offers, and then you're more likely to get it back once they use it. So sort of like some of the other aliens in the game that you can ignore, like Lloyd, for instance. You could ignore Assistant in terms of never using the help card, but again, they're usually very useful, and there's no reason not to go ahead and take advantage of it. So, and again, a lot of the cards will be things that Assistant can also take advantage of at that time, but it's always good to get a reward because you can usually take advantage of that. Our next one is Nanny. So Nanny is the cruelest of this group. It's kind of a mean alien, so it's probably my least favorite of these 3. The power of consequences. When you are not a main player, after alliances are formed, but before encounter cards are selected, you may use this power to motivate one or both main players. To motivate a player, give them 1 negotiate card from your hand to add to their hand, and give them a consequence from your essence card cache that they play face up next to their alien sheet. Now, if a motivated player reveals a negotiate card, and it doesn't matter if it's the one you gave them or not, you carry out the incentive on the consequence card, which is returned to you, and you receive 1 reward. If a motivated player does not reveal a negotiate card, you're going to carry out the punishment and leave the consequent card in place to mark the timeout. And a timeout means that they're out of the game for 1 or 2 encounters, and that can be a big deal. Now, a player in timeout may not participate in the game in any way or communicate with the other players, nor may other players communicate with the player in timeout. If that player is the offense, their turn ends. If that player becomes the defense draws destiny again. At the end of the timeout, the player returns the consequence card to you. In any case where play cannot progress because of timeouts, all other players' consequence cards are returned to you. So, yeah, if nobody can have a turn, then there's a recourse for that. Whenever 1 or more other players discards negotiate cards, you may use this power to retrieve 1 of those negotiate cards and add it to your hand. You play and discard negotiates normally. So Nanny has the ability to collect negotiates so that they can then hand them to other players with their consequence cards so that they can continue to use their abilities. Here's some examples for Nanny. So this is a ship consequence. The incentive is you release 1 of your ships from the warp. The punishment is you lose 1 ship to the warp, and you are on timeout during the next player's turn. That's the whole turn. So if it's 2 encounters long, that's 2 encounters that you're out. Here's a reward consequence. Your incentive is receive 1 reward for every ship you have in the encounter. Pretty good. The punishment for not revealing a negotiate card. The Nanny looks at your hand and discards any or all artifact cards and cards from the reward deck. And then you are timeout during the next player's turn. So again, a whole turn. Here's a hand consequence. Discard as many cards as you wish from your hand. That's your incentive. Your punishment is that the Nanny looks at your hand and discards your highest attack card, and then you're in timeout during the next player's first encounter. So some of these can be very harsh, and because you'll have 3 to choose from, you can dole those out to the players who are going to be the most affected by any given one. And that is a way to stay engaged in the game. So the negotiate cards will come up. If you don't start with any as Nanny, you won't have to wait very long before some appear in the discard pile, when you'll be able to scoop those up and then start handing them out to the other players. And yeah, if you're very careful with how you decide who gets what, you can have a big impact on the game. Now let's talk about Sheriff. Sheriff, you have the power to ticket. Once during each player's turn, you may use this power to choose a ticket from your essence card cache and either discard it or give it to any player who is committing the infraction on the ticket and has cards or ships that are needed to pay the fine. That player immediately pays the fine, and if the fine is in cards, you select them at random from their hand. If the fine is in ships, the player chooses which of their ships to lose. The player then keeps the ticket face up. As the fine is being paid, you may use this power to seize it as a gratuity. Add some or all of the cards to your hand instead of discarding them, or retrieve a number of your ships from the warp up to the number fined. Then the player flips the ticket face down, and gains immunity against further tickets while they have a face down ticket. And when all other players have immunity or have no tickets remaining, or you have no tickets remaining, you're going to collect all those tickets. So Sheriff is going to be paying attention to what the players are doing according to what they're holding in their essence cache, and looking for people to have infractions so that they can give them the ticket. And then the fines will give the opportunity for Sheriff to get cards, or to get ships out of the warp, or to just punish the player so that they're losing cards or losing ships as appropriate. Here are some examples from the Sheriff. So loitering, the infraction is not accepting an alliance invitation. So if you've got this in your hand, you're just paying attention to who doesn't join a particular side that they were invited to. The fine is they have to discard one card. And again, you can intercept that card as a gratuity. Excessive force. The infraction is winning an encounter by more than 10, or revealing an attack card of 20 or higher as a main player. The fine is they have to discard 3 cards. Vagrancy is having only one ship on a foreign colony. Discard 2 cards. Panhandling, being able to send multiple ships as an ally, but sending only one. Lose 2 ships to the warp. So you can see how these things are going to happen. Players are not going to be able to really avoid these situations, even if they knew which ticket cards you were holding, which they're not really going to know. So Sheriff is going to be able to fire fairly regularly throughout the game. That can have an impact. And the reason that I think it's fun is just I think some of these tickets are kind of silly and clever. And it's sometimes hard for the players, even if they're familiar with what the infractions are, it's sometimes hard for them to not break them. So that's the fun of Sheriff. So you're probably going to be interacting less frequently, but you're constantly on the lookout for these things. So it does keep you engaged. And then at any time you could hand out a ticket. So that's where we are with those aliens, the 10, really 12 aliens that you can use as any player in the yellow alert category. Let me know what you think of these aliens, and if you've had some fun experiences with any of them in the game, or any other as any player alien that has shown up in the yellow alert category in the comments. And thanks for watching.